I've been a member of the Upper Midwest Allis-Chalmers Club for ever, it seems like. And today I'm filling in for Gilbert Buss, which normally does this, and he is the true Roto-baler guru in my book. And he is in Washington State, or headed there. So I'm a substitute. I'll do the best I can. And we're going to talk about roto-balers. Around the turn of the century in 1890s, late 1890s, family in Nebraska, Lubins, were quite ingenious and quite inventive, and they were always looking for a better way to make things and help people and so forth. And one of the problems that they had in that part of the country was there wasn't a lot of wood to burn, and there wasn't a lot of straw, but the straw was bulky and hard to handle. And so about the 1900s they came up with a patent to make a round bale. And later on, there were a couple of the sons, kind of Melchior and Humo, took over the development and started making some type of a baler and trying to perfect the process of rolling up straw and hay and whatever. And they had 5 or 6 different patents on things, tried some things. A lot of them failed, a lot of them didn't work very well, some were too expensive to make, all kinds of problems. And finally they got something going, and but they tried to raise money, and there was all kinds of shenanigans, all kinds of scandals, and the whole thing kind of went belly up. So Humo, younger of the sons, kind of just took it on himself to, he got rid of all the politics, got rid of all the other people involved, and he just kind of focused on making round bales. He came out with his first patent in 1910, and it was not a very solid machine. It probably worked a little bit, but when you're making things, there's always a better way. So from 1910 to 1930, he worked by himself pretty much. With his own financing. He worked a day job. He was a designer. He was a machinist, farmer. He was pretty much a handyman type of guy. And by 1930, he had pretty much had the concept of how to get this thing to work. And in front of us here, this is a 1937 baler, and this is what Humo Lubin worked on and later sold it to Allis-Chalmers in 1940. Allis bought it from Humo, and he got a royalty, he got a pension every month. So after he had sold the patent and all the round bale rights to Allis, he had a whole different life. Before that, he kind of lived hand to mouth. It was a struggle for him, but Allis knew what they had, and they took it then in 1940. By 1941, there's a gentleman that had just got out of engineering school, Paul Hera, and he got the project to take this product and develop it into something that could be marketable. And that's what we see here. Now this is a working baler. We're not going to break it for you today. It is kind of precious. It's only 6 of them known to exist. There's 3 in California, 1 in Canada, 1 in Iowa, and this one that we know of. There's probably more, but this is what we know of today. The round baler, for those people that are interested in it, it is a dangerous machine. And there is a sign on some of the later ones, and it says, be careful, because they can eat you up, and we don't want that. The story goes that at the end of the production of the round baler, there were so many lawsuits, and part of the settlement with Allis-Chalmers was that they would not produce any more round bales. So everybody else took off this idea and developed it, and you drive through the countryside today and you see a lot of big round bales. Allis-Chalmers pioneered this and never received the rewards. We're going to talk about the ball hitch. In 1947, Paul Harrow, he was the engineer in charge of the Roto-baler, and he was given another assignment to come up with a hitch for all the manufacturers to keep the implements from falling off and running over them or getting hurt. And this is what he came up with. This is, I call the Allis ball hitch. This was not something just for Allis. It was supposed to be for all manufacturers. Allis used it only, and the other people didn't like it, and I don't blame them in a way, but it was something that Allis was standard equipment from 1947 to about the middle 1965, and then they dropped it and went with the pin hitch, and that's what this baler has. But that pin could fall out, and it did, and there was people getting hurt and so on. The other thing that on a round bale there is no knotter, and so they came out with a tool, and all the Roto-balers had this, and you take the end of the twine and you stab it into the bale, and that keeps the twine from unraveling. I don't know of anybody that ever used them. It was there, and today they're hard to find. So let's move on down to the next baler here. I got Carly helping me today, and very seldom I have relatives here, but I'm very fortunate to have him here today. Thank you. Arland is here. He tells a story about the Roto-baler after it was, Allis already had it in place. This is a 1947 model. This is the year it was introduced. This is how Allis advertised it, and you can see there's very little shielding around where the hay goes into the bale chamber. Later on they put some guards around for different reasons, and mostly is to keep people's hands and keep people out of there. But this is the first production run of balers, the first year. And they didn't change very much, and later on they had a change in the feed mechanism for the conveyor, and we'll talk about that later. Now, Arland is going to talk about a story. We're very fortunate that through a set of circumstances, we got to meet Paul Harrow, and he tells his story, and I'm going to let Arland tell it.
It's too long a story to tell how I actually made contact with Paul Harrow. It was almost accidental. We won't get into that today. But Paul Harrow became a good friend of mine, as well as Gary, in his later years. He was chief engineer at the port plant from 57 through 79, and he was assistant chief engineer from back there in the early 40s until 57. He was also in charge of all the hay equipment. He was given the job to make the baler, as Gary said, over into something they could sell. Well, they had it ready to go, I guess, the way Paul talked, in 1944. They could have went into production, but the war effort had limited what they could produce. So it just didn't go anywhere for a few years. And Paul tells the story. See, they bought out Leuben, and I'm sure in the contract he couldn't produce any more balers, but they didn't have anything in there that he couldn't kind of work on balers, I guess. And he calls them up there one day in 1946 when the big strike was on for 11 months at Allis-Chalmers. They couldn't make anything, couldn't do anything. And he says, I got a better idea on this twine wrap thing. I want you guys to come out here to Omaha and we'll demonstrate this thing to you. So Paul and Chuck Scranton, who was chief engineer at that time, got in their old Chevy and they drove out across Iowa and out there around Omaha. And they went to the field in the afternoon, and what Leuben had done, if you'll see the old baler over here, you've got that threaded jack shaft there that makes the twine arm move, stands up and down. Well, he'd put a second one of them on, so that he had two twine arms, one coming from each direction, so that you had tight twine out on the corner of each bale. And they went to work and was baling, and they had nothing but trouble with that half nut that rides up that jack shaft. Paul said they had a whole pail of them when they started in the afternoon, and by 5 o'clock there wasn't any of them left. They did not stand up good on those balers, we know that. And finally, Paul Harrer and Chuck Scranton, they got in their car and drove out of the driveway onto the road, and Paul looked over at Chuck and he says, what do you think? Chuck said, one loose end is enough. And that was the end of the story. They didn't buy the idea. And I said to Paul, after some more discussion, I said, well, I can see a merit to this thing. I said, if you get them timed right and one would overlap, you still only have one loose end because you'd wrap over the other one. And maybe this was pretty good. He says, too much expense, too much trouble. We didn't want nothing to do with it. So that's the story on double twine.
It's an interesting story because the new balers, the new big round balers, some of them now have the double twine system on them to make it faster wrap. So, okay, we're going to continue down the road here. The next one is a kind of a special baler. It belongs to Arland here. And this is a self-propelled. It's kind of a combination of all kinds of different things. It started out with a Roto-baler, and they added a WC tractor. It's got a Dodge differential, a Chevy transmission, and all kinds of neat things that control it and make it go. And we're going to be running this today, so if you want to see something kind of unique.
Nordine Manufacturing Company down there, and there's one more in Nebraska I know of about like it. The others I don't know where they went.
You want to see it right after we get done thrashing and combining and raking, then we're going to be baling, and this will be out there. So let's move on down the road here to the next baler. Basically a standard baler with a B Allis-Chalmers motor, but what's unique about this baler is the soft center. And in my course of travels and buying parts, I run across Elmer Olson up in North Branch, Minnesota, about 30 years ago. And he had invented this, and I came up there to buy some twine. I had a baler, and I didn't have any binder twine. It takes binder twine. I couldn't find any in Minneapolis. So I figured, well, where would you go to find binder twine? So I went up to the ACO dealer, or Alice dealer in North Branch, and I got there, and Elmer now is in his late 70s, I would guess, and he's sitting in the back room, and I'm coming up to the parts counter and asking for binder twine. And he says, we just sold our last binder twine yesterday, and if you can find me some, I'd be appreciative. Well, I didn't know what to do. I had hay down. Not that it makes any difference, but I didn't have twine. So I went down to Golden Valley into a garden store, and they had truckloads of it. So I called Elmer up and said, Elmer, if you need twine, I got a source. And he was my buddy ever since. And then he started telling me about the soft center attachment, and he had invented it. And a blacksmith in North Branch, Bob Lee, and they got a patent on it, and they got a royalty of 50 cents per soft center. And this one is a lot different than what Paul Hare came up with, but this is the soft center that Elmer invented, and he sold it through the dealers, sold it probably direct. I'm sure anybody that wanted one, a new Elmer, they could buy it. I'm not sure what it costs exactly, but this is a reproduction one that I made from his sample, and it does work quite well. And when he says soft center, this has a nice soft center. The Allis ones, it's marginal, but it's the idea is there. So other than that, the baler is just a standard conventional roto-baler. The next one, 1959, when you are roto-baling, you have to stop and let the twine wrap, and then the bale kicks out, and then the conveyor continues. So for every bale, you have to stop. Now, when these came out in '47, there wasn't too many tractors that had live PTO. So you had to shift it out of gear, finish the bale, stop everything, put it in gear, take off, and you do this hundreds of times every day. With the advent of live PTO, you could the baler could keep running, so all you had to do was clutch or hand clutch or whatever, and it was a lot nicer. They had sold quite a few balers by that time, and they looked ahead and they said, well, maybe we can make these things non-stop so that we don't have this stopping and we don't have these complaints. So they worked on what we call the number 10 baler, and this is the next two balers are what we call number 10. The second one has just got an engine on it, otherwise they're the same. And what happens is they had to speed up the tying system, so they put a transmission here that when that twine tube comes down, that kicks into double the speed, so it makes it go a lot faster. And then there's a little rattle chain that flips up and brings the hay over the top conveyor and then drops it back into the lower one. So it is non-stop, and if Lon Sager is here, we're going to try to run it today. This is yesterday was kind of the maiden voyage, if you will. And he got parts from different parts of the country. The baler came from, I think, Iowa. The conveyor came from Missouri. These are very, very scarce. There's maybe a couple dozen of them that we know exist. But we're going to try to run it. It was not very successful, and they made like 1,500 of them. And most of them were converted back to a standard baler. They would take the conveyor off, the top conveyor and the lower conveyor, and give you a standard conveyor. But then you still had the fast strap on it, and which made it go a little bit faster. Okay, let's go down to the white tops. Arland had a question here. A lot of the number 10 balers were converted to a standard baler. And then the serial number, Gilbert would know more of some of the specs. I believe this is one of 200 they made with that fast strap transmission. And very, very hard to find. I only know of a couple other ones. And if you got to stop, does it make any difference if you stop for a second or two more, and then the additional cost of the transmission? Yes, you could get more done, but then if that transmission gives you trouble, you got a big job ahead of you.
We've seen the inside of them.
And we have been inside of them, and parts are impossible. But anyway, this is a very unique, not unique in a way, it's rare because it's a standard fast trap baler and a white top. 1960 they came out and had to jazz things up a little bit, put white wheels and the white top on. Oh, these are what we call the white top balers. Let's move down just a little bit and then we're almost done here. Change they did on the white top is they changed the whole design of the stopping and starting of the conveyor, and the other ones had a complicated dog and clutch and planetary gears and all kinds of stuff that I to this day I can't believe Paul Harrer did that, but it worked quite well. And later on they came out with just a couple of V-belt and a belt tightener and did the same thing, and according to what people tell me, it worked better. So sometimes you learn. So this particular baler is brand new. It has never made one bale. It's never been turned over, and we hope it stays like that. And I have a dream someday of this one going to the Smithsonian. Arland, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we're going to talk about combines.
At 12:30 today,
The other baler right beside there happens to belong to me, and that will run in the field. That's
given by Arland
virtually
Lepper.
the same serial
That's on the
number
north side
within
of the
about
grandstand.
20 some, I think, of
Interested in that.
Larry Cargs here.
Also
But
at
we'll run
12:30,
that other
there's a
white
seminar
top
in the show
this
arena.
afternoon. Now, if you guys would want to follow me, we'll go up to the Gleaner combine, and then we'll come down the combine road.
That's at the show arena at 12:30.
Talk about combines. Primarily, we're going to talk about Allis-Chalmers all-crop harvesters, but being we are featuring Gleaner this year, and by the way, we did have two of them here. One must have went to the field.
I can't. You'll get feedback in from the microphone. It goes right into the mic. And
Well, I can stand back.
Okay.
Yeah. Will that help? Okay, guys. Gleaner Baldwin. That's the name that was always on them until the later years. That was all a company of the Baldwin brothers down there in Kansas. They was a little like Umo Lubin. They devoted their life to trying to make the combine. They was working with them in the early 20s. Some of them were horse-drawn at that time. I've got some pictures at home of prototypes that had horses in front of them. By 1925, they went into production with a combine that was mounted on a Fordson tractor. Made it a self-propelled, I believe, 8-foot cut. I saw one of those work in a field a few years ago. And the Fordson hardly had enough horsepower, you know, to pull itself, let alone that big combine hanging on it. I could see it wasn't a very successful arrangement. However, in that day, they was talking 10 or 15 bushel an acre wheat down in Kansas. That would go a little better than the heavy stuff I saw it try to operate in. But they made them for a few years, and then in 1928, Gleaner came with pull-type combines, and they were quite successful. The first ones had a Model T Ford engine, then they had a Model A engine, and they just kept improving their combines. Now this is a 1946 model. It uses a Wisconsin VE4 engine. It's not the same engine as you're used to seeing on a New Holland baler or a Case 6A combine. That was a VF4, was a bigger engine. That's the engine that should have been on here, by the way, because this does not have enough horsepower. But that's a Wisconsin VE4 and a little 6-foot cut. It's a very, very well-made combine. It was an expensive combine. These things were $2,000 right after World War II, where you could buy the all-crop harvester for around $650 without an engine and around $900 with an engine. That's kind of the story on this. Now we did have a little self-propelled sitting here, the Model T Gleaner. I think it must be out in the field. Gleaner went into self-propelled combines in 1951. Actually, their first one was the one called Model A. Then in 1954, they come out with that little Model T. It's a small combine with a Ford tractor engine, 172-inch on like an 860 Ford tractor. 7 or a 10-foot cut. The one that sat here was a 10. Down in our museum at Hubbard, Iowa, we've got a beautiful little Model T Gleaner with the 7-foot cut, which is very, very unusual, but it's sure nice if you want to haul it on a trailer. We did demonstrate that at a show some years ago. It worked very well. Gleaner, of course, became a major manufacturer of self-propelled combines. Allis-Chalmers bought them out in 1955 and turned out to be a very good move for Allis-Chalmers. And of course, Gleaners are still built today. Now let's move over to the all-crop harvesters, which was such a success story for Allis-Chalmers. A fellow named Harry Merritt was put in charge of the Farm Equipment Division of Allis-Chalmers in 1926. Harry Merritt had a lot of ideas, and he seemed to be able to execute them, and the man had a real good head on him. Rumley on and Allis-Chalmers took them over. Their headquarters was LaPorte, Indiana. Harry Merritt had the idea then. He was that same year he did it actually. Bought out a fella, patent rights of a fella out in California, the name of Fleming, which was the patent for the all-crop harvester. What the patent consisted of was a design such as this, with a sickle just as wide as a cylinder, or cylinder as wide as a sickle, however you want to put it, with a cross-rise straw rack. And I think they gave him something like $30,000 for that patent. And Harry Merritt put the fella in charge, or 2 guys, in charge in late 1931 to develop that combine into something they could sell. They worked on that a couple of years, and they absolutely were not getting anywhere. They were relieved from their job in late 1933. A fellow came on board then, I mentioned his name earlier, as chief engineer at LaPorte. His name was Chuck Scranton, and he in turn right away hired a fellow, a young man out of Purdue University by the name of Bob Worrell. And in '34, Bob Worrell began to develop this combine into something they could produce and sell. The biggest problem those guys were having, the patent came with an idea of a wire brush cylinder with 750,000 bristles in it. And Bob Worrell finally pitched that thing out the window. They was having trouble with the bristles coming out of the cylinder and getting into the grain, which certainly you couldn't have. And Bob Worrell dreamt up the idea of the rubber cylinder bars and the rubber concaves and the rubber shelling plate, which worked out wonderful, and you could do so many of the small seeded crops as well as the grains. So by mid-1935 they went into production, and this is essentially what they came out with. It's quite crude compared to some of the later ones. You had in order to save money, you had a system here. There's your clean grain elevator, and when this spout is in this position, the grain comes back in the bin. And then if you want to unload, you have to move this spout up and out, pull up the wagon, and open a trap door in the bottom of the bin. Combine had to run the whole time while you unloaded. It was usable, but it wasn't very handy. It was something, though, to get them into the combine business. Now let's try and move up around, and we'll get into some of the improved things. Came with a bin that and also a gearbox down here so you could stop the machine while you unloaded. Had a separate auger to unload. Big improvement. There's just no doubt about that. Now notice we're still with no shielding on the power takeoff. Quite crude in that respect. And we've really got essentially the same header on this combine as that very earliest one. Same sickle drive and all that. Now we'll move over here.
That one's got a scour clean on top.
That is a scour clean, which was an option. Hart Carter built those. Move over here to the little Model 40. Again, Harry Merritt had an idea. He felt like there was a need for a smaller combine that he could sell for less money. And where he was like at $595 for these, he came out at $345 for this little Model 40. It took 1 row of soybeans. They went to the straight-through design, supposedly to save a little money. That came out in late 38. Testing showed, though, that this combine wasn't as efficient as the crosswise straw rack.
For those who are interested,
They
there's a
built
kids
these
pedal pull
in
today
late
at 1
38
o'clock
through 39 and
at the
40,
Children's
about
Activity Building.
15,000
That's
of
on the
them,
northeast corner
and they
of the
finally give it up.
showgrounds here.
Sales
For
weren't that
interest
good.
in the kids pedal pull,
But
that
40s
starts
are
at
in
1
demand
o'clock, and that's
today
at the Children's
by the
Activity Building.
collectors, and this is a usable 40 combine here. Had a good friend, an old fellow, passed away a few years ago, told me he had one of these, farmed with it. He said it worked pretty good, but you couldn't get much done. 1944 model. Gary, am I right? Yeah. Come out during the war, and by the way, these machines were so much in demand, the government did allow Allis to produce some of them right through the war, as well as the WC tractors. There were some of them produced. That's about the only thing that they let Allis produce through the war. You had a few things now that are improved. You do have a better header, a better sickle drive. This one's got the pickup on it. You got shielding on the power takeoff. You've got a thing that came out, I think, in 1941 called the quick change cylinder speed. There's a crank over on the left side over there, just down by below the cylinder shaft, that will allow you to speed that cylinder up or slow it down just by turning the crank, which was, the older ones you had to put shims in the pulleys. So there's a little bit of the change that happened up by 1944. Engine drives were available pretty much all the way through the run after they came to the 38 models. This one's got the engine. Let's see, this is a 60A combine. Am I right, Gary? Yeah. Biggest thing I feel on the 60A that really was an improvement was on the unloading. Now you had an auger in the bottom of the bin which let the bin clean out totally. Now the old 60 was gravity, and if you had some oats, for instance, that wasn't real dry, or wheat, they wouldn't tend to clean out. You had to get in there with a broom or a shovel or your feet or something and try and kick it out of there. This was a over-center dog clutch, I believe we call it. It was very positive feed. It stayed engaged. The old ones, you usually had to retighten them a couple times while you unloaded the bin. So that's some of the bigger change. The 60A also had a little improvement on the reel as far as supports for the bats and the sticks on the reel. And you also, that was the first one that had a hydraulic lift. You could put a cylinder on it rather than a lever. That was an option. This one has the assembly on it to pull a wagon behind rather than have to dump your bin. By the way, is this a Sudengay? Sudengay made that. That's a company at George, Iowa, I believe. And they made that as an option that you could buy for your Allis-Chalmers all-crop harvester. There were several companies built those, and they varied in design. It's about a 48 model, I believe Gary said. This was something that you could get from the factory, I understand. You notice you got your normal bin, and then you got a bagger bin in front of it. I never myself ever figured out why you wanted a bagger. I don't know if they ever sold one of them in the state of Iowa, but since I've been in this show thing, I find that like Indiana and places out that way had baggers, and I think Wisconsin sold some baggers. But anyway, this is the bagger unit on here. You can use either that way or the bin. You notice there's a seat up here for a guy to ride on, and you can switch that from one bag to the other, so while one's filling, you have that chute down and you can slide a bag down to the ground. Looks to me like an awful lot of work, but that's what some of them did. This combine, this is a 66 big bin model. Actually, they came out in 1955, I believe, produced up till 59. What they did here, they made them take a 6-inch wider cut. They still used the same canvas, same cylinder. You notice they just flared the head 3 inches on each side. The early 66s had the same bin as the 60A, which would be the bin down the line there. You notice the lever where you can kick the auger in and out. That's the style that came on the 60A. Well, 53 and 54 model 66s had that small bin. Now they had come out with the corn head for these combines, And they found with that small bin, on good corn, you couldn't get across an 80-rod field with that small bin. So they increased it up to 25 bushel and gave you the detachable auger. Quite a bit of improvement there. Then, the next one beside us, we got a number 90 combine. They came out in 1957.
Allis-Chalmers seen the need for larger combine because farms were getting bigger. From the idea of the cylinder being as wide as the sickle, and they actually narrowed the cylinder down to 41 inches instead of the old common 59 inches. It is bigger in diameter. I don't know how much good that ever did. These machines in weeds, some people used to have a lot of weeds in their beans, would give you some trouble trying to feed all that into that narrower housing there. But I believe we had a 30 bushel bin here. It uses the same auger as the 66 did. It has a swinging drawbar to keep your road width down a little bit. That's the number 90 combine. About 7,000 of them were built in 57, 8, 9, and 60, and that was a time when Allis was going to quit building all pull-type combines. We'll mention the guy's name again, Paul Harrer, being chief engineer at that time, persuaded management in Milwaukee that they believed there was still some life in the old 66 combine, or basically the design of the 60, if we put a good head on it. So they used ideas from the head on this 90, and they come up with a number 72 combine, which we'll move over here.
Ever made, trouble-free, and just worked wonderful. It just really made a nice combine out of them. To have the wide feeder house, and you got a 6.5 foot cut now here. Same bin as, of course, the 66, same everything. But Paul Harrer told him, he says, I think there's some life yet in the old machine. And they did build about 10,000 of those between 1959 and 1969. Now we'll just back up here a few years to the self-propelled. Allis, seeing the need of self-propelled, they could see it coming.
At 1 o'clock today, there'll be a kids pedal pull, and that's in the children's activity building. Also at 1 o'clock, the tractor games.
We'll just go ahead. They decided back in the early 50s they was going to do this. I think development work started about 1948.
Barrel races there.
They was going to have a self-propelled combine. They retained the old idea of crosswise straw rack, rubber on rubber shelling.
And that's on the south side
they
of the
come with this number 100. The first year, 1953, they had the WD engine, which just plain wasn't enough. Then in 54, they came out with the WD-45 engine, used that the rest of the way. This is a straight 100, built M53, 4, 5, 6, and 7, about 5,600 of them in that time. They had big ideas. They were going to export all kinds of these things to South America, and they built a big, fancy new building at LaPorte just to make the 100 combine. I think 2 train loads was all that ever went to South America. Then in 58, they decided to do a few changes on it. They made what's called the Super 100, and we don't have that here. The steering wheel was set back at an angle like you'd much rather have it. It had a retractable finger auger up here where this one don't. It had a different drive for the chain that runs the reel to keep from getting messed up with material getting in the chain. It had bigger wheels, bigger tires. It had a much improved console where your gauges were to read the water and oil and all that. These you had to turn around and look backwards to find that. And then also they had a much improved auger for unloading the bin. These you had to either have it in the position to unload or where it is right now, or you could stand it straight up, and that was 14 foot high when you did that. And it's a heck of a job to put this up there. One man really has a wrestling job to handle that thing. Well, then they went to the Super 100, and it, part of it, the first part coming out was stable. You didn't move that, and then it folded in the middle, folded back up on the combine. Very much improved. That's kind of the story, and then that was the end of the all-crop harvesters. The 72 was the last ones built in 1969. I could mention that. A friend of mine and I have a museum of all crop harvesters at Hubbard, Iowa. We've got more all crops than we have lined up here, a more complete lineup. We do have the Super 100 right beside the 100, get the comparison. We've got a 66 with a corn head, and thanks to Joe and Gary, we have probably the only one in captivity that we know of. One of them built in 1940, or number 60, with self-leveling cleaning chute. That has an engine drive, which was standard on those combines. It has the tandem axle, which was standard. An extremely unusual combine, and thanks to them, that's down there in our museum. If you ever want to see the combines and hear the story on them in the museum, there's about 15 of them in there. Just get a hold of me. I can sure give you a card. I don't have a whole raft of them, but I'll give you a phone number. Or sure, if you get to coming that way, give me a call.
Hand over his face. Sing Allis-Chalmers. Johnny.
Rock.